Okay, so I've made only one change to the deck, which was the change I discussed in the last video, wherein I switched out Legacy's Allure and substituted it in Umezawa's Jitte for that card. Basically, Legacy's Allure can get you a 2-for-1 where you take one creature and use it to trade for another. We do have Shackles to do that as well, of course, but Jitte can just keep an entire board full of creatures suppressed or non-existent. And so overall, I think the power of Jitte is just much higher. Plus, it's easier for us to take advantage of due to War of Invention and Tezzeret the Seeker. As well as, well, I suppose Enlightened Tutor can get both. But midway through the game, they can have an immediate impact, whereas Legacy's Allure often takes a while to get ramped up. So it's really just one of those cards, a lot like Ancestral Vision, where you just want it early or not, or you don't really want it. And Jitte, you kind of don't want it early, but after that, it's always good. So there could be a case for playing both. And if you're lucky and draw them in the correct order, then you have an excellent early game play followed by an excellent mid game play. But I think that's probably just a little bit of a stretch given how well this deck does at controlling creatures. So I took Legacy's Allure out. And with that, I only played actually 5 games today, and you can see the neat thing here is it gives me a timestamp. So it took 55 minutes roughly to play 5 rounds, partly because of this first one, which you'll see was incredibly favorable and quick. So game 1 against Quantum Eraser. Let's see if we can get it to play. Come on. How often does this have to happen? Wow. Magic Online is just such a resource hog. All right. Here we go. Round 1 against Quantum Eraser. And he is playing Teferi, and I have an opening hand with By Force in it. Now, Teferi is a combo artifact mana based deck, so I keep happily. And my opponent, and I also won the dice roll. And my opponent leads off with this crazy triple artifact play, but I can Spell Pierce the Bauble. That prevents him from fetching a land if he ever gets another mana, and turns off his Mox Opal right now, allowing me to By Force away the Mox Diamond and leaving him completely crippled. The follow-up play of the Ready is too much for my opponent, and he just scoops it up. So when your games go that quickly, yeah, you could fit them into an hour, a set of 5. Pardon me. Okay, round 2 is against Insane Command. I had to mulligan my opening hand, but I'm playing Daxos the Returned, who makes... who when you it rewards you for playing enchantments. So as a result of that, I saw a Spell Pierce on the top of my deck and decided to leave it on top, even though I really want to hit a 3rd land. My opponent plays a Chrome Mox on turn 2, and I let it happen because I have Dak Faden in my hand, and I would very much like to... I was hoping he'd play like Phyrexian Arena that I could pierce there, but I'd very much... bottom line is I'd very much like to steal that Chrome Mox. So I'm going to go ahead and play Expedition Map, and... basically 3 for 1 my opponent. The card he invested in it, plus the Mox itself, plus I get +1 mana while he goes down 1. Anyway, glad I didn't pierce it because he's got a Banishing Light follow-up, which I am going to pierce and hope that my follow-up is Dak Faden. I really do need to draw a land here, and I did. Fantastic. So I get to go fetch a Underground Sea and steal a Mox, and we are looking real pretty right now. Opponent Brang Maggots away a Umezawa's Jitte. I'm sure he'd love for me to play that Winter Orb there. Well, he probably wouldn't love it, but he probably wouldn't mind it much either. That's not going to happen. Fortunately, I drew a Scroll Rack that I can get rid of it, but first things first, let's Wasteland and play Scroll Rack now. My opponent has actually missed a land drop multiple turns, so I'm banking on this really hurting my opponent's development. And it does. I top deck an Ancient Tomb, which allows me to play Breya with Sacrifice ability up, which means I can kill the Brain Maggot, and then play Jitte, and then from there, as I was saying earlier, Jitte just completely controls the board. Legacy's Allure here, I might take Daxos or something, then I'm staring at a Maggot that I can't kill. not nearly the same impact as an active jitte. So just as a point of note, quite frequently it is best if you're going to sacrifice your um, if you're going to sacrifice flyers against a deck running black, you frequently want to sack maybe one flyer and one artifact that isn't a flyer so that they cannot diabolic edict or otherwise edict you, forcing you to sacrifice Breya as the only creature, unless you decide that that effect just isn't that important, in which case, obviously don't worry about it, or if you feel like the artifacts that you have available to sacrifice are too important. All right, so round 3. With that said, I'm going to play against Oceany, who I have played before, and who is playing Gitrog. And against Gitrog, excuse me, provided I get the mana, this hand looks really good. Now, my opponent's got a super, super fast start. Quite frankly, I thought the game was over here, and in most cases, this probably would have been a first turn kill. But my opponent, well, we'll see what happens. So he didn't pay the full measure of life right off the bat, which he should have. I hate to say this because I don't really want people doing this against me, but the truth is that's the correct play. Without even thinking twice about it, he should have immediately pulled cards into his hand and then pulled cards into his hand again. Well, in this point, my opponent's Pernicious Deed City of Traders draw is really weird because I'm going to pause the game again. This is such a weird position for my opponent to be in. I don't know what he Vampiric Tutored for, but the Gitrog monster, I guess this kind of works out. So what my opponent can do is cast Gitrog and then play a land, killing the City of Traders, drawing a card. Maybe he plays a fetch land, then he draws a card, then he plays another land, he draws a card. So this isn't the worst thing here, but it is a little bit clunky if that doesn't all work out. Anyway, my play for my turn is going to be Tezzeret, and I'm not going to get Winter Orb. I'm going to get Grim Monolith and cast Worn Power Stone. So here's my thinking. Pernicious Deed, I have to be cognizant of Pernicious Deed, and so I really want, if my opponent goes for Gitrog and he does all the fancy card drawing, I really want Tezzeret to have at least 2 counters. So that, because Deed won't kill Planeswalkers, and I want to be able to fetch Winter Orb and play one of my removal spells on the Gitrog monster. So I can get rid of it, orb my opponent down, and make up for the card advantage that I'm way behind on. Now, if my opponent decides that let's say I went and got a 2-drop here or less, say I went and got Mox Opal or something, I didn't get Grim Monolith and didn't play my Worn Power Stone, then I think my opponent will he may sacrifice Pernicious Deed. He has 2 mana to do it, so by getting Worn Power Stone, he can't kill the Worn Power Stone this turn if he wants to do an EOT, an end of turn Deed. So that's all part of the thinking. The other part of the thinking is that if my opponent does pay 8 life here and go to 8, and let's say he plays Gitrog and does some shenanigans, but nothing too serious, it would take a series of misplays on my opponent's part. But if he were to go to 8 and pass the turn and let me get to my main phase before blowing the Deed, thinking maybe he wants to Deed, like, I don't know, at the end of my turn, then what I could do is I could tap Worn Power Stone, untap Grim Monolith and Power Stone, tap for a whole bunch of mana, and cast Breya. If my opponent doesn't respond with Pernicious Deed, then I actually have enough damage to deal 9 to my opponent. And my opponent would be at 8, and I would win. If he does respond with Pernicious Deed, then he sweeps away his Mox and Sylvan, which is a good thing for me. City of Traders would be gone. And at that point, I would have had generated so much mana off Worn Power Stone and Gitrog, I would easily be able to play either the Abyss or Jailer, even having played Breya, depending on whether or not I have a land here, of course. But I could follow up with the Abyss and then take out the Gitrog monster. So there's a lot of permutations where I don't like my position. It's not good. But this play kind of gives my opponent the opportunity to make mistakes, which could allow me to win this game. And that's about all I can hope for. So we'll see. Are we going Winter Orb plan? Are we going Breya plan? What are we doing? I do not know. Well, my opponent confuses me. He plays, well, I don't know. He plays Oracle here, Oracle of Moldiah, reveals a Blighted Fen and a Glacial Chasm. So he gets to play those lands off the top, which kills the City of Traders, but they tap for black thanks to Urborg. And Glacial Chasm, which has a cumulative upkeep of 2 life, prevents all damage that would be dealt to my opponent, which means that the whole like line where I try and win with Breya is completely out the window. To make matters worse, my opponent has Splendid Reclamation on top, which means he can get his Dark Depths and City of Traders back into play, and he can also let his Chasm go at some point. Plus, he can use Blighted Fens if he ever gets down around to it, but that's less important. So the bottom line is that Splendid Reclamation, I feel, is going to give him so much mana, so much advantage that this looks really bad for me. Like this turn was not good, and then he heroes downfalls to Tezzeret, and that makes this turn much worse. And for my turn, I draw Toxic Deluge. It's not very helpful, but I guess I can pay 20 life if I need to kill a Dark Depths creature. So I go ahead and Palace Jailer as Oracle. Well, first of all, I don't want him playing multiple lands per turn, and secondly, I need to start trying to make up for the Sylvan library, and the more cards I can draw, the better chances I have of doing that. I'm also kind of hoping, I really want my opponent to deed before so that I can deploy the rest of my hand. Anyway, he plays Collective Brutality and just kills my Palace Jailer. Plays Azusa, but has no lands to go with it. And this is very important because I draw a Crucible World. So his no lands to go with it, which means, so if his Sylvan did not reveal a land, he would have played a land if it had, right? So with that in mind, I'm going to do something I do not like at all, but I'm going to go ahead and vindicate his Sylvan library and then play the Abyss and pass. Now the thinking here is I do not want my opponent to get the Monarch, because I'll certainly lose if that happens. Secondly, my opponent doesn't have land in his top 2 cards. Azusa is going to die before he can really capitalize on it. I do know that he can put all of his lands into play from the graveyard, but that would use up his whole turn, and that gives me another turn of Monarchy, plus my opponent may decide before doing that it's about time to blow the deed. And in this situation, it's very hard for my opponent. He's got a kind of the Glacial Chasm up keeps getting high. My opponent has to decide between playing the card that puts all the lands into play and popping the deed for 4, because he won't have enough to kill the Abyss. He'll be 1 short. No, I guess he will have enough. It depends on if he lets Chasm go. So, I mean, again, I'm just letting my opponent, I'm trying to set it up so that my opponent can make mistakes. What I want him to do is, I just want time, and this is the only way I can see to get it. Well, my read on land was apparently wrong, so I'm completely confused by why he didn't play one last turn. Anyway, he blows deed, and look at what I draw. So by stalling for 2 turns, I found myself a daze, and look, my opponent killed his Mox Diamond and now only has 4 lands. So when he goes to put all of his lands into play, no, he does not get to do it. And he let it because he let his Chasm go. And I draw Wasteland, taking out his black source and setting myself up for a Wasteland recursion with Crucible. I sense my opponent is on the back foot, and we're going to continue to apply the pressure with Breya and put him in a horrible position. And with that, my opponent gives up. So I'm certain that my read on the next 2 cards not being land had to have been correct. He must have been sandbagging at least 1, but if he had had 2, he would have put them both into play with his Azusa. So I guess since he had 1, he figured he would just play it as a regular drop, and that's why he had a land, but I didn't anticipate it. However, now I'm 100% confident he doesn't, because, well, first of all, he scooped, but secondly, if you have 1 land, maybe you sandbag a land, but if you have 2, you don't. And so since he didn't play both, he doesn't. Therefore, his next card is not land, and therefore it's highly unlikely he's going to make a play that has any impact on the board, which means that I can then Wasteland his homeward path and just close this game out. So, yeah, that was just crazy, and there was a whole lot of thinking there. I hope that wasn't too boring for you, but that's kind of you get a sense of the gyrations that my brain was going through, trying to figure out how do I win a game where my opponent goes first turn Sylvan Library, a game that should be unwinnable, should have been unwinnable for me. But fortunately it all kind of worked together, especially considering my opponent was in my hand, making me discard as well on top of all that. All right, so enough on that game. Here I'm playing Bruise, Tarl, and Kram versus my Breya deck. I have a hand that if Weathered Wayfarer dies, again, I hate these hands where it's just everything's on Weathered Wayfarer, especially against a deck running both red and white. But when my opponent fetched an untapped land, I thought, man, maybe I should Wasteland here. But I just decide I'm going to go for Wayfarer because I need Wayfarer to stick. I could have held up Spell Snare for turn 2, but this game really is about Wayfarer, and I need to go for it and just hope that this isn't incorrect. And it turns out to be probably right. So I play Polluted Delta rather than Wasteland, thinking there's a chance my opponent impulses or something at the end of my turn. I want to Spell Snare it. Or in his turn, he might have drawn a 2-drop that he'd like to play. For example, a Signet or a Baby Jace or something. None of that happens. I don't intend to go defenses down much if I can help it for the rest of the game. Those first couple turns were hairy, but my opponent wasn't able to capitalize on my shields being down, and now they're back up. So, all right. At the end of my opponent's turn, I'm going to go ahead and attempt to Weathered Wayfarer by sacking to target Volcanic Island, activating Wayfarer in response. Fortunately, I didn't do it with Delta, because look at his response. Even Mind Sensor getting flashed in. So I'm going to go ahead and search in response to Mind Sensor with the fetch land. But I find no lands on my top 4, and then I top deck Lightning Bolt. So I'm able to kill the Evan Mind Sensor, and my opponent has to play a land to kill Wayfarer, which means I get to use it one last time. Tough call on what to get. I really want black. I want 2 mana, so I could get Tomb. I could get a Source of Black, but I decide I'm going to get Cavernous Souls because, well, he's playing blue. All right, so go ahead and counter his Mana Leak. Playing a Scroll Rack here seemed to make a lot of sense, even though it does. I do open the window for whatever his next play is, but I felt like it was pretty safe, and I need to continue to hit land drops. So with my opponent tapped out, not that Cavernous Souls is doing much, probably was the wrong call in hindsight, but yep. Opponent clears the board, and I top deck a Weathered Wayfarer, or excuse me, I cast Yawgmoth's Will, replay Weathered Wayfarer and a Wasteland and pass, wasting his Shivan Reef during upkeep. My turn, I decide that I don't think it's safe to play Thran Dynamo here. I think that it'll get countered, so I just dig with Scroll Rack, and I find an excellent new hand. And I can now play safely a Mana Leak without having to worry about my opponent going Wasteland Spell. All right, at the end of his turn, I don't hate the top of my library, but I don't love it, so I'm going to attempt to Whir for 1 and go fetch a map so I can keep hitting land drops here. If I do get a map, I'm going to get a pickup land so that I can hit land drops for the next couple turns. My opponent Force of Wills that. That's kind of amazing. I think he must have assumed that I was getting Skull Clamp, so I suppose that makes a lot of sense. Well, I'm going to equip Jitte and Swing, and it sticks. This is excellent. At the end of my opponent's turn, I factor Fiction. He did hit a land drop here, but it's not red. And he splits the cards up into Nahiri, Thran Dynamo, Command Tower, or Limited Resources, Sword of Feast and Famine. I'm going to take Limited Resources, and the reason is with Scroll Rack and having just dug very deep into my deck, there's a very good chance that I can hit a land drop here. And if I can play Limited Resources first, then play my land drop, which will make 10 lands in play, and my opponent will never be able to play a land again, nor will I, of course. But my opponent doesn't have red, and that means I can lock my opponent out of one of his colors. So I draw, and it's not a land, it's better. It's Crucible. So I try the Limited Resources, it sticks. I go for Crucible with Mana Leak backup, it sticks. I hit him, I play Wasteland from the graveyard, and that's it. My opponent cannot play red. My opponent sends me a message, wait, wasn't that banned? Yeah, only in multiplayer is my response. So on my turn, I Wasteland him, replay the Wasteland, equip Swords, smash, and he gives up. Had he not, of course, I would untap all of my lands and go ahead and just Wasteland his blue white, which means limited resources only did something for one turn in this specific game, because I decided that Crucible Wasteland was better. But what it did do in this game was, so if you think about it, I'm gonna keep wasting my opponent, and then when he starts missing land drops, I'm gonna start accumulating more and more lands into play until we'll reach a point where we have a grand total of 10 lands in play again, and my opponent won't be able to play any lands. At that point, he'll have like 3 or 2 lands and be stuck. So it's not like limited resources wasn't going to be useful later, but of course later probably wasn't going to come just due to how fast Sword of Feast and Famine and Jitte actually finishes the opponent off. The other thing that was coming from my opponent was I was going to Dak Faden his Sword of Feast and Famine and double sword him so that he was just going to be dumping 2 cards per turn while getting wastelanded every turn. So I would say that's a pretty good and fair position to scoop from without feeling too bad about, without wondering if you could have won. I think that's pretty reasonable. Anyway, for the last round, I have to mulligan. I have to mulligan again, and I'm playing Leovold. I tuck a Mox Opal to the bottom of my deck, but I do have Toxic Deluge, which is one of the only decent ways of dealing with Leovold. And I have a Daze, so I can... Oh, God. My opponent has turn 2 Sylvan. Again with the Sylvan Library. I have to Daze this. It is a unbeatable card. I must Daze it. I do not want to Daze it. It sets me so far behind in board position. But if I don't Daze Sylvan, 100% this game is over. The guy who wasn't playing blue, I guess, you know, maybe I beat him with Sylvan like I did. The guy who is playing blue, there's no way in heck I beat him with a Sylvan Library. So I haven't replayed the Underground Sea here. So my opponent plays Leovold, and he's got Expedition Map threatening me, and he plays Jace. I haven't played Underground Sea back. I played Fetchlands because of my opponent's Expedition Map. I don't want to give him a turn where he can sack and Wasteland me and basically time walk me with a Leovold beating my face in. So I only have the fetches, but I know that my next turn I have to Deluge because I got to kill Jace while it's vulnerable. And pretty much if my opponent counters here, I lose the game. So what's about to happen? He sacks for blue in response. He taps for 2. Maps. Yes. All right. Board is cleared, and he fetches a Dust Bowl, which I am super happy with. That is so slow, and I have tons of mana. All right, let's get Dak Faden down. I could sit on a Stoic, but then I'm playing the game my opponent wants me to play, where we just Dust Bowl every turn. By getting Dak Faden down, we're playing the game I want to play, which is if he's going to use Dust Bowl, I get to pause. I get to at least be improving my hand as we go. So I DAC and I end up having to throw away. So I threw away Stoic Rebuttal the first time and a land. The second time I throw away a land and a Merchant Scroll in order to keep the ready Lightning Bolt. I'm going to try to win this game with my Planeswalkers. Now he's showing a Birthing Pod on top of his deck. I'm very scared of that. So I need to kill his Oracle right away. And it's very painful to do it because I actually kept a Talisman, played the Talisman so I could run out Duretti, immediately kill Oracle, and my opponent shuffles away his pod. How fantastic. So I'm hoping he just Dust Bowls me and says go. Rather, he plays Garrick and passes. All right, so I DAC away by Force and Spell Snare in order to cast Breya. Again, I was very much hoping I would have drawn a land here so that I could then bolt the Garrick, but alas. When my opponent swings in, I know what's coming. I know it's a Toxic Deluge. I know that I'm letting my opponent pay 1 life rather than 4. But if I were wrong and it was an Edict, I did not want to triple block and let my opponent have that Edict. I wanted to get whatever I could out of his hand. So anyway, let's pause because we're moving a little too quick for this game. So my opponent played his commander on his turn and passed. I had to play a... So I DAC up and throw away a Mana Leak and a City of Traders, keeping a Lightning Bolt and a Demonic Tutor. It was extremely, extremely painful to throw away the City of Traders because City would have allowed me to play Breya next turn. But I feel like Demonic Tutor, I need to go get Winter Orb to have a chance against this Dust Bowl now that I'm throwing away a bunch of lands and my opponent's way ahead on mana. So I decide to Lightning Bolt. Of course, before I used DAC, I had to Lightning Bolt his commander because... had I not, when I used DAC, I would have discarded 2 and drawn nothing. So he got to draw a card off of that. But, oh, did I have an artifact in play? I must have had an artifact. No, okay, everything's right. Yeah. All right, so anyway, my opponent's follow-up, though, is just Leovold. Nothing exciting, and I drew Swords to Plowshares, which was incredible. So I Demonic Tutor, Winter Orb my opponent, make a blocker for Duretti, and pass. Trump blocking here, my opponent plays Anvil of Bogarden, which causes players to draw an extra card and then discard. Well, with Leovold, I wouldn't get to draw, but I would have to discard. So during my upkeep, I untap Hallowed Fountain and Swords to Plowshares Leovold right away. My opponent gets a draw for that, but I now get to use the Anvil without a problem. So I get to draw 2 and discard, and then I go ahead and DAC and dig even further. I keep a Dark Confidant here. I could have kept a Mox, might have been better. But I keep Dark Confidant just because I feel like I need to rebuild my hand and I need some time to do it. And my opponent makes a fairly baffling decision. He plays a Chrome Mox imprinted with opposition and then casts Bloom Tender. I guess because he needed the mana, but I don't quite understand how this advances his position. On my turn, after the Anvil and DAC, I'm able to ultimately keep a land, which was Mana Confluence, and land tax. I throw away Dark Confidant, and I don't remember what the other card was. But that lets me Duretti away his guy, play land tax. Dak steals his Chrome Mox, and I pass. My opponent, for the turn, he now has 2 lands untapped, and that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and tax for 3. Now, the nice thing about Tax Rack, one of the nice things about having it in the deck is specifically Duretti. Leovold, rather. Leovold cannot prevent you from doing Tax Rack shenanigans, and that's pretty meaningful because it's one of the only ways to build up your hand under a Leovold effectively. Dark Confidant is certainly another one, but it's obviously slower. Factor Fiction works. But anyway, here, so I draw 2 cards from the Anvil. I throw away an island. I find an As Foretold and a Yawgmoth's Will, which is super yummy. My intent here was to probably just hold Yawgmoth's Will and save it in case my opponent clears out the Winter Orb. And meanwhile, I'm just going to keep on DAC and Duretti, using DAC and Duretti to sculpt, the ideal hand, as well as, of course, get As Foretold and play right away. And with my opponent at 1 card and severely constrained by Winter Orb's pressure on his mana base, he just gives it up. At this point, I'm clearly drawing like a madman, and it's probably over, and I agree. I was very glad, though, just this game, I was so far behind all because of Sylvan Library in the 2 games I faced against these green decks. The card is just so utterly degenerate and unfair, and it requires you to, do gymnastics to respond to it. It's one of the most frustrating cards in the format to deal with still, just because I think it's just, well, you've heard me before go on about Sylvan. It's just one of those cards that it makes no sense, why this guy I have to Stone Rain myself to save myself from a Sylvan, and why my other opponent, I couldn't prevent it, and he was able to draw 5 cards for 2 mana. Why is that even fair? Plus have a permanent Sensei's Divining Top in play that other colors don't have access to, thanks to top being banned. It's they ban top and then say, oh, only green can have it. They ban Necro and then say, only green can have it. What? Anyway, craziness, but we got there. So anyway, this is the build here. I'll go ahead and scroll down so you can see the rest, but under the Steam vents is Tundra, Underground Sea, Verdant Catacombs, Volcanic Island, Wasteland, Watery Grave, Windswept Heath, and Wooded Foothills. So if you're going to play the deck, you've got the list. Good luck. Thank you for watching. Have fun. I'll see you next time.